Well, Amy, it's been too long since these
It
birds of a
has.
feather have been together, but
It's been
we
too
are
long.
back together after several months of doing things. You've done a lot of things. You've got a new book coming out.
Yeah.
You've been spending your time in North America, dodging hurricanes, I'm guessing. And
Yeah, I
I
haven't
just,
had to worry about hurricanes. I've
what,
got daughters getting married and sons
yeah,
going to college and cool stuff like that going on.
cool stuff. And I'm just doing the normal stuff, dodging crocodiles, rabid
Oh,
koalas, and
I can only
kangaroos with
imagine.
anger management issues, that kind of a thing.
Well, and I was listening to your little your live video that you did,
Hmm.
and all the books that you're writing, holy moly, but I wanted to laugh when you were talking about the book you're writing for the on the Roman Empire in the third century. I mean, Mike, you've got to do some funny marketing for that book with the playing up the whole all men think about is the Roman Empire. Like videos of you with a cloud thinking
Yeah.
about the Roman Empire in the
Yes.
third century.
What would
I
Lucius
mean,
Paulus do right now, or something like that?
I was just like, oh, he could really do some fun stuff with the marketing for this book.
Yeah,
So
I
there's my
was.
pro tip.
Yeah, there could be. I was thinking about dressing up maybe as a Roman centurion
There you go.
and just going around town. Bit of hyper masculinity never hurt anyone, as far as I can remember. As
Well, as
far as
long
I
as you're
can
making fun
remember.
of yourself.
Yes, but yeah. So lots of going on for both of us. But big event that's just come out or happened is Kristen Dumay and her team have come out with this great short. It's only half-hour documentary called "For Our Daughters." Now,
Yes.
you've had the pleasure of watching it.
Yes.
Pleasure, I think,
Yes.
would be the wrong
Yeah.
word.
I don't know if that's the right word because it's, very disturbing.
Yeah, yeah, I think
It's
disturbing. And
disturbing.
I watched it with my dear wife, and
Hmm.
we had different reactions to it.
Okay,
So
let's hear about that.
this is a documentary about sexual abuse in the church, how it was covered up, and in particular how the perpetrators or the victimizers were kind of celebrated for owning up what they did, and their first thought were for people was to restore them, forgive them, not any sense of justice, retribution, or disqualification for what they did. It's how they were celebrated for owning up to their various sexual assaults, which was
Hmm.
so peculiar. So we're watching
Yeah.
this together, and I'm feeling a little bit of like cringe, disbelief, and a sense of disgust and disappointment, going, oh, I just can't believe that. But watching my wife watch the show, her response was just flat out anger. She was
Yeah.
just getting increasingly angry as the
Hmm.
show went on. So I was kind of in this sort of shock, disbelief, and disappointment, but she was having like almost a visceral reaction of how angry it was making her to
Right.
watch this and to see this all done in Christian churches. But Amy, what was your response?
Well, I knew about most of the stories that were shared on there, but it's always different when you hear them,
Mm,
when you hear it coming from them and it's not even just written, but they're being interviewed and they're saying what happened and you even see footage. You see footage of this confession that is very staged and leaves out a whole lot. And I mean, that standing ovation the standing ovation that these pastors get and this outward like forgiveness for something they didn't fully confess to, it's appalling. I mean, I feel like my visceral reaction is like that is when I really felt I felt sick watching that part,
yeah.
and to think I was just so empathizing with what would that feel like to be the victim. And I really liked what Rachel Denhollander said of where it costs to stand and support the victim,
Mm,
but it doesn't cost anything to support the person who's in power. And you just see
Yeah.
that over and over again. I mean, I didn't suffer from any kind of sexual abuse in the church as far as anything like, physical like that. But I did suffer through a lot of sexual harassment,
Mm,
and to see that over and over again, how minimizing it was
mm,
to what they actually did. And then to hear that, the victim saying, like, or the survivor, I should say, saying that they said that she hadn't taken the right steps to her healing yet. If only she could, just like
yeah.
this pastor.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. That's
Wow.
terrible. And the other thing is these men who confessed didn't do so at their own initiative. They did so when they knew the information was coming out.
Yes,
So
they got ahead of it.
they only confessed when they were cornered like a rat in a trap and faced with no other alternative, when it was
Right.
coming out anyway. So there was no sense of coming forward naturally, after, realizing
And
they'd
this is
done something.
years later.
Yeah, but years later, it was only when someone said, "Yep, I remember what you did, and I'm going to
Mhm.
tell people," then they made the disclosure. And
Mhm. And they're so brave for doing
so,
that.
yeah, I think it's just
Oh man.
so topsy-turvy the
Yeah.
way they invert who the hero is here, or who's the person who's doing the right thing. And I
Hmm.
mean, the other thing that baffles me is in a lot of places I've been, they tend to have like a one strike policy. If you engage in any kind of sexual like infidelity or sexual sex crime, that's it. You are done.
Hmm. Yeah.
No more ministry for you. You become a lay person.
That's what you
But
would think.
it's so I just can't like, you know, if you've done something like some sort of sex crime, that's it. I mean, for all time, once you spit in the water, there is no going back to the well. You can never again be a shepherd of the church
Mhm.
if you've engaged in like, aggressive and repeated sexual harassment, sexual assault. There is no point of, well, he's in a period of restoration. That's like zero tolerance. One
Mhm.
strike, you are done. So I'm just dumbfounded that you can, whether you admit to it or not, but you're found
Mhm.
guilty, that there's still a pathway to remain in ministry.
Yeah.
If that is the weird thing, and I just do not understand why. And even on the masculinity side, I thought if you want to, if you really want a hyper display of, well, a strong display of masculinity, I think it'd be natural to challenge other men than the women. Like, if you see, I mean, if you see some guy getting a bit rough with his girlfriend, I like to ask them, do you talk the same way to men? I'd like to find out. Come have a chat
Yeah.
with me.
I know
Or
the
do you only talk
misogyny
tough
in
with
it
women?
all.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I just feel like too, and here's one thing that, in I think a lot of the cases profiled in the movie, it kind of shows a more mega churches and,
Mm,
these celebrity pastors, and
mm,
even, some people might watch it and think, they can see some of these parachurch, militant men's conferences and say, well, I don't go to a church like that. But I just want to, I was thinking while I was watching it, okay, all the churches we visited when we left my denomination, multiple churches we visited were these small churches that had, real nice people in them, some I've known for a long time. And yet there's the American flag up on the stage. Um, there's the elder standing up telling us who to vote for. Like the Christian nationalism can show itself even in very friendly ways. And then I also was thinking, well, man, in my old denomination, there was a terrible sex crime in my church where a father was sentenced to jail for molesting his daughters. And when it got announced to us, our church was only 175 people. We all knew and loved this family.
mm.
Um, our pastor, who was a meek man, gets up there and obviously says how wrong it is, doesn't give too many details, But you hear about the visits he's going to be getting in jail, and you hear about how, okay, like there's biblical reason for his wife to divorce him, but that his prayer is that God's grace is big enough to maybe like this miracle of this marriage would still survive.
Mm.
And I'm thinking, what in the world? Like, no, this marriage doesn't survive this. And what message does that send to the children who were molested by
Yeah.
their father?
Yeah.
Like, what in the world is going on here? And, to see this like rushing of church leaders to go visit this man in prison, but not see the same care for the wife and children,
Yeah.
you know, even though they feel sorry for them, and know that they've been terribly wronged.
Yeah. It's like the victims get pity, but the perpetrators get grace.
Yeah, they get all this grace, and it's like this counterfeit, kind of grace, I feel like, because we're just sentimentalizing grace. It's gritty. It's way grittier than that,
Yeah.
like, so
So if
in small churches too, you see
yeah,
this stuff.
yeah. Who do you think needs to watch that documentary the most?
Okay, this is my problem, because I see why they made it political, and that's Kristen's thing, like her whole Jesus and John Wayne book, shows us this whole thread of Christian nationalism in the church. And
Yeah.
that, no, it wasn't that Christians went and plugged their nose and voted for Trump, but that we created the man.
Mm.
So I get it. But I feel like the people who really could benefit from seeing the harm of it are going to turn it off quicker, because it has that political side to it.
Yeah.
And because, they are Trump supporters, or, that part of it, I think, makes it harder for me to share with people who I think would have a different reaction if it was just the church abuse. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe, because I've definitely seen personally in many cases, where loved ones of mine have come forward in private schools that they were abused in sexually. And, the beloved teacher who's now the board member, they turn on the victims.
Yeah.
The families do, and keep their kids in that school. It's
Yeah.
wild.
That's and that is the concern, that the people who need to see it won't, and it will just help other people remain fresh in the disgust they already have within the sort of, the sort of politics, patriarchy,
Yeah.
and all of
Well,
that.
that's the question for me, is like, what is the impact? Because I think it's a great film. It's short, it's well made. And, these survivors were so brave to do it. And then, they really show their pain. And like, some of these people have written about it. Their faith has been wrecked over this, shipwrecked. And, they could never set foot in a church again. And so the impact, when you're watching it, you think one thing, like, oh man, this has got to come to an end. This has got to come to an end. I'm glad this movie's been made.
Yeah.
And yet, it's just like when you listen to the whole like Mark Driscoll podcast, or, whatever the latest expose is.
Yeah. Hillsong or anything. Yeah.
Yeah, like they just go on. They just go on.
Yeah. That is the sad aspect of it, how much behavior is going to change. I'm a little bit optimistic. I'll tell you why. Because for a lot of people, certainly who don't live in the American context, like us Aussies, we're not kind of, in that tribalized context. We don't necessarily embed our religion in our politics and in the patriarchy. So I would say maybe outside that US binary context, it won't be so much of an issue. And I think there will be a number of people who will be looking at the way their church or their elders or their leaders treat women, the sort of, license to sin that mega pastors have or celebrities have, and they will start to raise natural questions, and watching that documentary will confirm their suspicions. So I think for the diehard people who are committed to that kind of, call it right-wing Christianity, no,
Yeah.
it's going to be they're going to be impenetrable. They won't hear the critique.
Mhm.
But for people who are like, hang on, is that really right? Or is that
Yeah.
really? I think something like that would be helping people who are raising the right questions. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think you're right. There are some people it will just be
Well,
it'll be water off a duck's back for a lot of people.
have have you heard any kind of response from any leaders high up in the Southern Baptist Convention?
I've
Because they
heard
were
what
definitely, a
well
big part of that.
well I remember when it started coming out, a lot of people were sharing clips of Christian Dumais talking about abortion or LGBT rights because
Right. Like
they wanted to
she,
discredit her
let's
before
discredit
it was
her
released.
for any of other
Um,
differences.
yeah, so there was a lot of attempt to discredit her as the documentary came out, and that was
Right.
deliberate and strategic.
Hmm.
I am waiting for the reviews from CBMW,
Are they
and
even, or are they just gonna ghost it? Like
well, they might.
it doesn't,
I
just
like
let
to
it.
th I know some people who live in that circle. I think I think there is something to be said, or even within TGC. Um, I do think some of them may just try pretend that this didn't exist, but it may become too big that even they can't avoid it, and people are wanting it.
I hope so.
And some will. You can't just dismiss this as just some kind of like secular, feminist, egalitarian anti-man fantasy because you can't because you watch the video, you got the testimony of the victims, and you can see what these pastors are doing, and you can see who's clapping, and
Yeah.
you've got to confront the evil elephant in the room. And I don't know how long they'll be able to ignore it, particularly if the video or the documentary gets more and more views and tractions. Their
Hmm.
own people are going to say, well, what should we think of this? Should we watch it? Should we not watch it?
Hmm.
Um, I think, yeah, look, if you're complementarian of any variety, you should watch this because
Oh yeah.
if complementarianism is allegedly good for women,
Hmm.
then
You got a problem.
you've got to
Hmm.
explain why perpetrators find a very safe place in your environs.
Well, and
And
that's it exactly. Like the whole culture has to change. And
yeah, um,
I think it was Rachel who also said, um, the reason why the abusers get away with it is because they get away with it. Like they think
yeah,
they can get away with it because they can get away with it.
yeah. And if thuggery is a virtue in certain churches, they need to apply that thuggery to the perpetrators, not to the victims. And
Mhm.
when you see complementarians going out of their way to make an example of the perpetrators, not the victims, then you'll know the council has changed, and that would be a more admirable form of masculinity that says it's actually good for women when men are really the protectors of women as they claim to be. When they're really doing that, then you can say it's complementarianism. Otherwise it's just a patriarchal protection racket, and it's not it's not having that. I mean, they claim to be the chivalrous protectors of women, but when you look at the videos, that is not true. It's unchivalry, it's cowardly, and I would even say it is unmanly what some of them are doing. And if they
Well,
really
and
want
what
to,
Krista Brown said, she said, people are going to watch this and say, well, I'm not an abuser.
hmm,
But she challenged that and said, yes, you are. If you're allowing this culture and you're doing
yeah,
nothing about it, because that's exactly how they feel. And because it's true,
yeah,
because who was it that said, I think it was Charles Spurgeon, that that silence, according to oppression, is cruelty to those they harm.
yeah.
So, your silence is also abusive if you know something's going on.
I don't know if you know much Anglican liturgy, Amy. Lord willing, someday you'll know more.
Fill me in.
But the weekly confession of sins is for sins that we have done, but also sins
Oh
of
yeah.
omission
Right,
for the
right.
things we have not done.
Hmm.
And maybe that is, failure to speak up, failure to draw attention to things, failure to do the right thing because it cost us. Maybe that is something that, we need to bring back
Yeah. And
into
that
it
takes
now.
a lot of courage.
Mm,
One thing, like my brother has a mixed martial arts academy, and one cool thing he does in the kids' classes, and it carries through to the adults, but with the kids, he targets it more as he has a different virtue every week that they talk
mm.
about.
Yeah,
And I was taking an adult class while I was talking with the kids' classes, and when my son was younger, and the virtue was courage, and like they've gone through these virtues multiple times, so he's asking them to raise their hand and like, what are some examples of courage? And it was so wonderful to hear these children say things like that, because this is how they've been taught there, to speak up for other people. That takes courage. So it wasn't like this bravado, what you would expect maybe in a mixed martial arts studio,
yeah,
but it was this to defend the weak kind of thing. And also, like, the next kid is like to tell the truth. That can take a lot of courage sometimes. Like I just think, okay, we need to talk to our kids about these things too, because
yeah,
somehow the adults don't have it.
yeah. Well, talking to kids, boys and girls about, right relationships,
Absolutely. Yeah.
expectations of behavior, and
It's very
stopping
protect
people.
myself
Yeah,
kind of culture,
yeah, yeah,
even in church.
yeah. I think that's definitely right. That's definitely right. But anyway, well, for people who haven't seen the video, irrespective of where you sit on a theological spectrum, irrespective of what your church is like, I think Amy and I would definitely recommend watching For Our Daughters. You will
Mhm.
find it somewhere between informative and infuriating.
And it's on
Uh,
YouTube
but you
for
do know,
free.
I think you do need to mentally prepare for this as well, because
Yeah.
there is a whole lot of ugly evil in this you've got to account, and it can be quite, I know, triggering, traumatic, but you
Oh
can have
yeah.
a strong reaction to it. I mean, I like I said, I had discussed, my wife had, like, rage. It just made her so angry, but it's something that you can watch. And I would say if you're a complementarian, you doubly need to watch this, because
Mhm.
if complementarian is allegedly good for men and women, then you've got to make sure that men are not defending men who abuse women. And this hopefully will inspire, men and women on that side of the ledger to
Mhm.
really reconsider the power dynamics and how they treat victims in their churches and associations. I mean, that's what I want to take away. Maybe that's going to fall on deaf ears, but I look forward to the CBMW and the TGC reviews.
Not holding my breath.
I'm not looking forward to Kevin DeYoung's review of it, because everything he says on gender makes me angry, in a way that threatens my sanctification. But we'll see, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. Okay. Well, Amy, great talking to you.
Yeah,
Uh,
you too. I'm glad to get back together again. Birds.
yeah, the Birds of a Feather gang. That's good. So, yeah, always happy to chat to Amy. And thank you for everyone for watching. This has been a pleasure. You've been watching Birds of a Feather with Amy Bird and Mike Bird.